Garland, thank you for joining me.
Great to be here, Peter. Glad you could come.
Yeah, thank you for joining me, for inviting me here to your spectacular place with great selection of classics, because there's few of them. Of course, we're not gonna overwhelm anyone here, so we'll just share the story of one of them, which is amazing story. The moment when you're pointing the details there, and I've seen you first time rolling exactly. We have 2024. I see amazing classic Ford rolling just this with the same, like with everyone else, with the modern cars, 45 miles an hour, sunny day, Florida, right. Model T, and that was you inside, and I couldn't wait to reach you somewhere on the parking lot and just have few words with you.
Okay, well,
yeah,
as many as you like, you can have. Now it's part of the history, but the history of that car is my father bought that car in 1958 in Tennessee, and what's amazing to me is, 1958, that's a long time ago. That car in 1958 was already 43 years old. It was already an antique. And of course, I grew up with the car. I don't know if this will show up on camera or not, but this picture was taken. That picture was taken in 1959. That's me trying to crank that same car. Yeah. And my mother in the driver's seat, my sister in the back seat. That's
spectacular. Wow.
Yeah. So people say, well, how long have you had this car? When did you get it?
Yeah.
Because people trade cars, and but that's how long this one's been in the family.
Amazing.
It's I inherited it when my father passed away, and it's a family heirloom to me. It'll never be for sale. I am now the curator of it, I guess you call it, not the owner, until I pass it on to some other family member.
Yeah.
And they keep asking me when that's going to be, and I say that's going to be a long time from now, so just cool your jets. You're not getting it anytime soon.
Yes. For right now, you're enjoying the ride, so.
That's right. It'll be at least till I can't drive it anymore.
You're enjoying the ride, and you're attending all those shows. Amazing, because you're not holding for a moment. I mean, I see you everywhere, so you're really, it's like kind of daily driver.
I wouldn't call it a daily driver.
Yeah, but
you're right. I like to take that show.
You taking it out,
Mercado,
once or 2 weeks, or
about once a month with that one.
Okay.
And just about once a week with the little more modern car. That's a little more traffic friendly.
Yes.
But the Model T is, people have heard of them, but not a lot of people have seen one up close and personal, where they can, the old time car guys, the guys my age and older know about them, of course, but a lot of the 18 to 35 crowd in particular has never seen one except in a museum.
Yes.
And then it's roped off and you can't go up and touch it and feel it.
Yeah, touch
and
it,
ask
feel it,
questions
see
about
how
it.
you're starting. I mean, when you're cranking this engine on the car shows, I'm like, that's really full experience.
Well, people don't, a lot of the questions I get was, well, how did you get it here?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I drove it here. What do you mean you drove it here? I said, it runs, and I drove it here. And like, this old car? And I said, yeah, this old car.
Yeah.
It's if it's well taken care of and maintenance is done, it'll keep going another 100 years.
Yeah.
They're the Model T was a very simple car, very easy to maintain, and for the most part, very reliable. And that's what Henry Ford built it.
Henry Ford did an amazing job with that.
It was not throughout it was 1908 to 1927, and throughout that it was essentially unchanged mechanically.
Yes.
And where a lot of other cars maybe advanced farther than the Model T did, but the Model T was built to be every man's car, and so it was kept cheap.
Yeah.
When they started out, they were about $700 and some, I believe, and by 1915, when at the height of production, which this is a 15, they were down around $350, $300, which was still a pretty decent chunk of money.
Yes.
But when Buicks and Chryslers I don't know if Chrysler, but Buicks and Cadillacs in those were selling for maybe $3,500.
Yeah,
That was more than a
difference.
year's wage. So that in that price range that Henry Ford could manufacture cars during that era, he put the average person on the road.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
he really did he put the America on the road. He really did. That's the car that did it.
Yeah. 1915. That's what you mentioned. That's what I was going to ask exactly, because they were released, how you mentioned, 1908 till 1927.
Yes.
Wow. So that's some nice run there.
It's a nice run. They made over for many, many years until Volkswagen Beetle took them over, and I think the Corolla has probably surpassed it now. It was the most manufactured car ever. They made over 15 million of them.
Wow.
Which, when you consider the manufacturing was not what it is today.
Yes.
It was on an assembly line, yes, but everything on the assembly line was still done by hand. No robots,
handmade,
no,
yes.
Nothing like that.
A lot of people, exactly.
A lot of people.
Got
They
jobs
they made the chassis on the first floor and the bodies on the second floor, and at the end they dropped the body on it and drove it out the front. But over 15 million of them, and people ask that question a lot too. Well, where do you ever find parts for something like this old? And because they were such a popular car, and even in the hobby after they became antiques, you can go online and order any internal engine parts or anything like that you need. If you need bigger parts, because there were so many of them, and because over those years they weren't changed a lot, you could find fenders and rear ends in behind somebody's barn or somebody. If you look, you don't have to look. If you were trying to find a water pump for a 1910 Buick, you're screwed. But if you're trying to find the left side of the rear end for a Model T Ford 1950, you can find it.
Nice.
You can still get whatever you need. It's just I think they're fun cars. They're unique the way they're driven. It's a 2-speed planetary transmission. There's 3 pedals on the floor.
Really?
We can maybe do a demonstration.
Yes.
Well, we should do a demonstration
Definitely.
of that, and we'll take it for a drive too. It's all set for that. But it's
so it's a little science.
Well, sometimes I just leave the key in it at a show, and people will say, "Well, aren't you afraid of somebody steal?" I leave the key in it more so I don't forget where the key is and, or lose it.
Yes.
Than worrying about anybody stealing it. But they say, "Aren't you afraid somebody's going to steal it?" I say, "Well, not really. First, they have to hand crank it without breaking the arm.
And that takes time.
If they get it started, then they get inside and they look at those 3 pedals on the floor, and none of them is the throttle. And what do those 3 pedals do? And it's only got 20 horsepower, so they're probably going to stall it 3 or 4 times before they figure out how to drive it. And by then, I'm on them.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny.
So it's a fun car to drive.
That's theft-proof car.
Well, I wouldn't say theft-proof.
Yeah.
But I would say I'm not worried about it.
Yeah.
But it's a fun car to drive, but it's not. It doesn't drive like anything modern, so you can't just hop in it and.
We have 100 years of.
Yeah, you just can't hop in it and drive off without a little practice and a lot of upfront explanation of what we're going to be doing.
But it's amazing that you are keeping this in such an amazing condition. How much work you got to put, like every month or maybe every few months, just to make sure that everything runs perfectly?
Well, it's got a list of things that need to be maintained. There's little grease cups on all the fittings that you have to screw in, and that's usually about every 500 miles you recommend that everything be re-greased. Well, the problem with that is when's 500 miles? It has no speedometer. It has no odometer. And they say, well, people ask that question too. Well, how fast will it go? I say, well, I really don't know.
Yeah.
It seems to cruise right around 30, 35, according to other traffic. But there's a list of things that I go through in changing the oil. The engine oil and the transmission oil are the same. It's all contiguous, all one set of oil.
Okay.
So that needs to be changed pretty frequently because there's parts that wear, the bands wear, and you get pieces of copper fixed what you had.
Yes.
And if you could work with your hands, and you had an adjustable wrench, a flat screwdriver, and a big enough hammer, you could fix just about anything on a Model T, and they did. And you need to. There's things you need to watch. The spokes they're steel rim wheels, but the spokes and the felloes are wood. So you need to make sure your spokes aren't getting loose. And,
yes.
There's just things like that you need to watch for. And because it's like anything else, like me, that's as old as it is. It needs more maintenance than it did when it was new. But Model Ts are known for a few things. If you pull in somewhere and they say, "Oh, did you know your Model T's leaking oil?" And my usual reply is, "Well, yeah, that means it has oil in it." That's good.
Which is good.
That means it still has oil in it, because they invariably leak. But it's just a quirk of the Model Ts. Now for as much as it leaks, do I want to take it all apart and put all new seals in and worry about it? Not worth it.
Yeah.
Not worth it.
So the question is, I mean, it's in a family from 1958.
That's when my father bought it.
And you have amazing memories, amazing picture. Exactly, this picture is spectacular. I love these old photographs. When was your first time? When your dad?
First time driving it?
Yes.
Oh boy.
how old you were?
I don't even remember.
I want to just ask how old.
My dad was very protective of that car, and pretty much nobody drove it but him.
Okay.
Now, as he got older, I guess probably it was when I was 16 or 17 when I got my license for a regular car.
Okay.
He said, "Come on, let's go out on the road," and it took some practice, and even when I was in college, and then when I moved here, they were in Miami, so it wasn't too far away, and so I would go over when he was unable to drive it anymore. I'd go over and he'd say, "Come on, let's take the car out." And that was his thing. He really enjoyed that.
Nice.
But we did go on tours with it many times. Glidden Tours is the one he liked to go on. That's the big pre-war car.
What is
tour.
it, if you don't mind?
Well, it's done yearly, and it's done by the either AACA or HCCA, Antique Automobile Club of America, or Horseless Carriage Club of America. They alternate years doing it, but it was one of the very first antique car tours, and I think it was started like in the 40s, and I think this year is the 75th. I'd have to look, but I think it's the 75th anniversary of the tour, and so it goes, and it's always pre-war cars, and it always brings out the best cars, and they can't be hot rods, they can't be modified, they have to be original cars. And
which areas? I believe all over United States.
It's usually, it is all over. Usually it's done in the summer up north. That's where the big touring season is for the antique cars, is in the summer up north. Of course, obviously they couldn't do it in Minnesota in February. They could, but nobody would come. But I think this year is in Virginia. And so they're spread around, and now that so Dad would say, "Hey, there's tours coming up I'd like to go on," and I would try and work around so I could go, and then he would drive a little bit, and then I would drive the rest of the day. And they do it from a central motel, and then they go out from the motel to see usually something involved with the hobby, or from the era, like an old grist mill, or a World War II airplane collection, or another car collection, or covered bridges. I mean, there's always something different going that they go and see. And so I did those with him, as many as I could. And then now that he has passed away, he didn't get cheated. He was almost 99 years old when he passed away,
fantastic.
A month short of 99.
That's great.
Or 2 months. And so now my nephew and I have kept that legacy going. We're trying to plan something for next year, and we've been on a couple tours
Fantastic.
already.
Wow.
We went on one of the Model T Ford Club of America's tours up in Minnesota.
Wow.
I always mess that up. It was in Wisconsin. Sorry.
Okay.
And there was over 150 Model Ts there.
Wow.
From across the spectrum. From I think the earliest one was a 10, and then up to the more modern cars, the 26, 27, that are a lot more tour friendly.
Okay.
But I have a friend that lives up there. I graduated with her from college, and I told her we were going to be in the area, and she said, "Oh, great! Well, maybe we can get together, just see each other, and have." She had family, and they wanted to see the cars. And great. Okay. So the Friday night before the tour, they always have a like a barbecue or ice cream social or something, and so everybody brings their car, and that's like the first event. So I said, well, that'd be great for you to show up. The cars will be there. And so she said, well, how will I know which car is yours? I said, oh, it's the black one. Well, I people that don't know about Model T was from 1915 on, you couldn't get until I think 26 or 7. You couldn't get any color but black. So they were all painted black. So of course when she got there, she says, well, she called me up on the phone and was giving me all kind of hell about that.
Yeah.
But it was a cool joke to play on her, and she took it as a joke. It was fun. We had a good time. And then we toured up there. Oh, that was fun. They had some of the Model Ts were dying on this side of the road there. The week we were there, they had the hottest June Wisconsin has ever had. The average temperature for days of the tour that we were there was 97 degrees in Wisconsin. Yeah, and they said usually it's in like the low 80s that time of year. Wow. And so a lot of them weren't prepared for that heat. Of course, mine's a Florida car, and I had a water pump on it, which they didn't come from the factory, and that helped. And antifreeze in it, which a lot of them run antifreeze, and that helped. So I was in pretty good shape.
Nice.
Other than the radiator leaking, and we had to get that. It's a leather story. I don't know if you want to hear or not. But there's always. Unfortunately, we were the first car to break down, and it was a minor thing. We had to. I fixed it in 10 minutes, but there was always kind of a booby prize for the first car to go on the trouble trailer.
Yeah, that was Henry Ford. Henry Ford built cars for anyone. He built simple cars, and he built cars just in one color, and that was his thing.
But the question is why?
Why one color or why black?
Only black? Why only black? Well, both reasons. There's really both reasons are valid. One, he was cranking these cars out like this, so he didn't want to bother with your choice of color. That was too disruptive for his assembly line. And the other reason is why black? Do you have a guess? Do you know?
No.
Okay. Well, the majority theory is that black. He chose black because black was the color that dried the fastest.
Interesting.
And he was putting them together, painting them, and sending them out the door. We didn't have time for these bodies laying around here waiting for the paint to dry.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And it was they really didn't even spray paint it. They kind of like flowed the paint on. Because again, it was 1915. A lot of that equipment wasn't what we have today, and a lot of the paints and all that weren't what we have today. But it was that was the reason why they were all black. If you look back into the photos of, especially in the mid-20s when the Model T was in its heyday, if you look along the street, that's how you can pick out what's not a Model T. If it's a color photograph, which was rare back then too, but you could tell by the shading that, if you could go down the street and say, oh, that one's, because they all looked very similar, even between the different brands. You can go down the line and say, oh, that one's a different shade. That must be a Buick or a Chrysler or a Chevy or something different because it's not black. But this car that I have is the 15 was really one of the first year when they really swung hard into big time production. And it was the first year that they went to the steel cowl instead of a wood firewall. And it was the last year these cars to tell the difference. There's guys from 100 yards away that can tell you whether it's a 24 or 25. But even if you get up close, the subtleties between what's a 24 or 25 or a 23 and a 24 is, they all look the same to me.
Oh, okay.
But there are usually
Some
the differences
tiny
are what kind of side lights it has on it, or the frame of the windshield, or something very subtle that unless you were a Model T aficionado, you would never recognize that. Or the shape of the fenders, that's another one. They went from round fenders to square fenders. But they all did look very similar, especially since they're all painted black.
Yeah. How is the drive on there? I mean, we're gonna take a ride, but how is the drive on a wooden, you know?
The wooden wheels?
Yes.
Well, whether they're wooden wheels or whether, and later in production, you could get steel spoke wheels,
okay,
wire wheels. But the real the real problem you get from those is you've got this. It's a 30-inch tire, okay, and it's only about 4 inches wide, and it's got 60 to 65 pounds of air in it, so it's rock hard, and the rubber is rock hard. So you have no traction pattern at all. And even these tires are made with a modern rubber compound because they're newer. But like if I go out and it's rained the night before, and you know how you get that kind of oil slicky area on the road, if I go around a corner, you can feel the rear end drift a little bit.
Wow.
Because the whole contact with the road is 4 contact patches like this big.
Yeah.
So, and the brakes from the factory for the roads back then, they were fine, but in today's traffic they would be considered woefully inadequate. Now we can go through when we get over to the car, we can do it now. This car does have some aftermarket accessories on it that make the car more drivable. It has what they call Rocky Mountain brakes, which is an accessory brake that goes around the outside of the drum, which increases your braking power quite a bit. It also has what's called a Ruxtol rear end. A Ruxtol rear end is a 2-speed underdrive in the rear end. It's not an overdrive like you would think for speed. It's an underdrive for being able to get up a mountain in high gear. The car only has 2 speeds. It's a 2-speed planetary transmission, and low is very low. I mean, it's you can't go, like, essentially by the time you get to the other side of the intersection, you're shifted into high gear. Okay.
Yes.
It's just to get you rolling.
Okay.
And high gear is very high, and you've only got 20 horsepower. So you can imagine, in Florida you're fine because there's no hills.
Yes.
But if you're trying to go up a 6 or 7% grade for 200 or 300 yards with 4 people in the car in high gear with 20 horsepower, you're not going to make it.
No.
So a lot of people added a Ruxtol rear end so they could shift the rear end into a higher gear ratio and still make it up the hill in high gear. The only other option, if you didn't have a Ruxtol, was to go up the hill in low gear, which you're going up at a very slow rate, running the high engine in RPM, and most of the time you'd overheat. The only other option really is you could turn the car around and go up the hill in reverse. And that was a good option, and there's a reason that was a good option.
Really?
This car does not have a fuel pump. There's no fuel pump. Henry kept every piece of everything off of it he possibly could to keep it simple. You know, so there's no fuel pump, there's no distributor, there's a lot of things. But without a fuel pump, the tank is underneath the seat. So the tank is not much higher than the carburetor, and it's gravity feed. So if you were trying to go up a long, steep grade and you didn't have enough fuel in the tank, you know, like you maybe had a quarter tank instead of the tank being full, the level of the gasoline may actually go below the carburetor and you'd starve it for gas and quit. So the resolution of that was you turn the car around and you backed up the hill.
That's interesting.
Well, yeah, it'd be very interesting, especially on considering what kind of roads they had. You know, mud and ruts.
Yes.
And that's why that very low gear was a wonderful thing to have when you had rutted, muddy roads.
Yeah.
but it's a 2-speed planetary transmission. The 3 pedals on the floor all operate the transmission. The pedal on the left is the high-low gear, and to the left of that there's a lever, and that holds the parking brake, and it also holds the shift pedal in neutral. So once you've got there's 2 levers on the steering wheel. One is the spark, advance, and retard, and the one on the right is the throttle. There is no floor throttle. Okay, so once you've got it cranked and you've got it started, you get in the car, you hold your foot on, hold the pedal on the left in neutral with your left foot, and you release the parking handle. Now the car is in your control. So to get going, you push in on that left-hand pedal while you're giving it gas. What that does is there's a band in the transmission. It's about this big around, about 10 inches around, I guess, maybe 12, and about 1.5 inches wide. When you push on that pedal, it constricts that band around a drum inside the transmission that activates first gear in the planetary transmission. Okay, so it's kind of like the reverse of a clutch. Instead of letting the clutch out, you're pushing the clutch in to get friction. Okay, so you speed up until the high RPM in first gear. Let the throttle off. Let the pedal out. You speed up in low gear. Let the throttle off. Let the pedal out. Now you're in high gear, and that's spring operated with a set of clutch plates in there. Just like a modern transmission has a stack of clutch plates. They're exactly the same style. And actually, the clutch plates out of a GM transmission will fit in, modern transmission will fit in there. And that's how a lot of guys retrofit them. So they put those in there and never have to change them again.
Wow.
But like if that spring gets weak, it'll slip. There's lots of things that can go wrong. But after that, you're done. You're in high gear and you're going down the road. To stop, you let the engine brake a little bit till you get down to a certain speed. Then you push the pedal in to neutral on the left, and the pedal all the way on the right is your brake pedal. Now, I say brakes. I'm giving them credit for being able to brake the car. Again, it's a band about the brakes from the factory stock. The brakes on the car, the entire car is one band about the same size, and a cotton lined steel band that's about that wide. And when you push in hard on that pedal, it binds on the output shaft of the transmission, and that's all your brakes.
Wow.
And you go, oh, okay, that'd be okay. I mean, it'll stop the car, but okay, now what happens if we break a universal joint? Brakes are on the transmission. We don't have any brakes.
Wow.
And they are not. They don't. If you have 3 or 4 people in the car, they don't stop you very quick, and that makes the car not a good modern traffic car for that reason. And a lot of people that tour with these cars add these what are called Rocky Mountain brakes, and that's a big drum that's added to the back wheels, and then it's almost self-activating strap around that drum is your added brakes. That's all tied in with the brake pedal.
See, that's interesting.
And it's a wonderful thing to have until you have to install them and adjust them. Because it's a fine adjustment between activating those brakes first, but you still need to have your brake pedal and you still need to have your brakes in your transmission active. So you want the Rocky Mountain brakes to apply first, and then if you need to stop faster or push harder, that brake in the transmission will still activate. Well, why would you need both, you say? Well, you were going to say that, weren't you?
Yes.
Of course you were. Okay. Why do you need both? Well, the Rocky Mountain brakes are self-actuating. It's wrapped around a drum like this. So as the drum goes forward and you apply the brake, it has a tendency to tighten and apply itself more. Okay? That works great going forward. But if you're sitting on a hill or you're going in reverse, when you apply those Rocky Mountain brakes, they're not very effective. So you need your transmission brake to supplement the Rocky Mountain brake when you're going in reverse. Got all that?
Wow, that's a lot. It
is a lot. And this car didn't have Rocky Mountain brakes on it when I inherited it, and that was we wanted to go on a tour in Tennessee, and I said, hey, there's no chance in hell I'm going on a tour in Tennessee with just the brakes that it has on it, because we had that experience where we had essentially burned up the brake band.
Wow.
We had 4 people in the car. We were on a tour, and it was a little hilly, and just it hadn't been adjusted that day. And I got to a stop sign, and I said, Dad, there's no brakes. What do we do now? And he says, well, you pull back. The emergency stop in a Model T, if you run out of brakes, is you pull back hard on the parking brake handle, which is it's steel shoes on a steel drum in the rear end, so that's not very effective. And you stomp on the reverse pedal. and that'll work pretty good, but I wouldn't recommend it. The third pedal is the center pedal, and that's reverse. So when you want to go in reverse, you hold the left hand pedal in neutral with your left foot and push in on the middle pedal with your right foot to get reverse. And again, that's a band about 10 or 12 inches in diameter, about 1.5 inches wide, that is constricting on a drum in the transmission that activates that portion of the planetary transmission for reverse. You've got, when you're driving, and the driving on the Model T is very twitchy. And what I mean by that is it takes a very small input at the wheel to change direction. And it also feeds back from the road that way. So you're constantly, you got these big diameter, high pressure, hard tires. So you feel every bump in the road, and every little groove, or you know how they groove the road sometimes. You feel that. You're fighting that with the wheel. You've got both hands going. You've got one on the wheel, one on the throttle. You've got both feet going. You've got one on the brake, one on the shifting or reverse, or whichever way you're operating the vehicle. So I like to say you really don't drive a Model T, you dance with it.
You dance with it, yeah. You're not driving the road takes you for a ride.
Well, it can, you're right, it can. And it's like dancing. If you put your hands in the wrong place, it lets you know by slapping them.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
But it's fun to drive, but it's not intuitive. It takes a lot of. You don't just hop in it. You don't buy one and hop in and say, "Okay, I'm going to drive to Ocala."
Yeah. I see right now after this knowledge which you're sharing, and approach and brakes and acceleration. There's a lot of involved to.
Well, and this car has no starter, so you have to hand crank it to start it.
Yeah.
And with 20 horsepower and you're learning to drive, you're going to stall it. So you need a very accommodating Model T person that knows how to start it, or I told my nephew when I was showing him how to drive it. He had driven it a little bit, but not to where he was smooth in traffic. So he says, we need to go out and practice that before we go on this tour. And I said, okay. So we went out, and I said, okay. I said, the first 3 times, I'll restart it for you. After that, you got to get out and restart it yourself. So that gave him the incentive not to stall it. But we practiced on hills that we knew we were going to be on, and with so little horsepower and the way the transmission is designed, you don't want to slip that band. You want to be able to push that band in and hold it against that drum in the transmission. If you slip that band, it's just cotton lubricated with oil and around a steel inside a steel band, and you'll burn it up. You can glaze it so it gets slippery, and then you really got a problem. You've got to change that band. But he did pretty good. He's a good driver. But people forget things like, okay, the throttle on this doesn't return to 0. If you let off your foot in the modern car, it goes back to idle. This one doesn't. It's all manual. You have to move it. So big mistake a lot of people make is they'll shift back to neutral without moving the throttle up and over rev the engine, which isn't good. You don't want to do that too many times. It's not built to haul. It's not built to handle a lot of high RPM. It's very simple. The crank, I don't even think the crank is fully balanced on it. And that was when the Model A came out. The engines were so similar. Model A came out, but it was 40 horsepower. It had a different bore and stroke a little bit. but the Model A was 40 horsepower, and the crank would fit in a Model T. So the hot rodders of the Model T area would take a Model A crank and put it in their Model T, and it gave them a little more, well, not 40 horsepower, but a little more.
Yeah.
And it was like anything else. The automotive industry's always been like that, no matter what the era is. Even back in 15, 19, 16, 17, 20, 25, there was performance parts for the Model T available. Frontenac made an overhead valve engine kit for it. There were just a whole bunch of different things that were available to improve the performance of the car.
So there was always somebody who.
Well, and you could buy from the factory. You could buy the car from the firewall forward, and just the frame in the back. So people made farm equipment out of them. They made snowmobiles out of them.
Wow.
They made a huge variety of. It was very versatile. I mean, for making farm equipment out of. So a lot of times people would put the Ruxtol rear end so they could gear it down, and the tractor tires on the back, and use it as a car and a tractor.
Wow, that's interesting.
And it was just because you couldn't afford a car and a tractor. You had one or the other.
Yeah.
And tractors were coming into their own about the same time. In the early teens, they were getting away from the big steam tractors and going over to, gas and diesel.
Yeah.
But it's a car that, and right now, because of the people the age of person that really was the Model T aficionado, unfortunately, they're all in their late 80s and early 90s now, and you can get a Model T at a really reasonable price. And if you want a good way to enter the hobby, it's a great car to get. You can get a really nice or a really decent one for like under 10.
Wow.
And of course, you need to find somebody to teach you how to drive it.
Yeah. Spend a little week or two.
But it's unfortunate that when you go to buy or you go to look at Model Ts, you're usually dealing with the estate or the grandchildren or the widow, because a lot of the owners have passed away.
Yeah.
And the whole hobby's like that. You can see the popularity of what's popular now moves with the age of the owner. The cars that are popular now, the 60s and 70s muscle cars, those were the cars that when I was a kid, when I like 14, 15 to 18, that's the car that I saw going down the road, and I said, man, that is cool. Someday I'm going to own one of those. Well, okay, now I'm in my 60s, mid 60s, late 60s, and I've been married, I have the kids, I've made a good money in my life. Okay, now I'm going to own one. And the hobby moves like that.
Okay.
So 20 years from now, it'll probably be the 1980 Prelude, Honda Prelude that's everybody wants.
Or car from 90s, yeah.
Right, exactly. The pre-war cars are they're coming down in price. The muscle cars are going up. I think they've kind of peaked, and who knows really what the next desirable car will be.
I see you have a pretty interesting stand here.
I do. A friend of mine named Cliff, I had done some, helped him when he was looking for a new hot rod, and
I think I had the opportunity to meet exactly Cliff. Yeah.
I'm sure if you've been at Stock Plaza, you've met Cliff.
Very nice guy.
Real nice guy, yeah. And he had made, when he got his, I helped him look for a car, and we found one. He bought it. He was thrilled. And he made a sign like that for his car, and I thought, wow. He said, if you'd like to have one, I have a graphic artist friend that did mine. I'm sure you give me the information, and we'll have him make you a sign.
Yeah.
And that was his thank you gift to me for
That's
helping
fantastic.
him look for his car.
That's very kind of him.
Yeah. And it goes through the highlights. When I go to Mercado or somewhere and I stand next to the car, I always ask people, do you have any questions? Because a lot of people will stand next to the car and look at it and not really know what they're looking at, but they don't want to, I don't know what it is, they just can't get past that. I have a question I want to ask. If they're a little older. Now, the 12 and 14 year, they'll ask you 100 questions. But So this sign, if I don't happen to be next to the car, kind of hits all the highlights of my little spiel that I give.
Yes.
But it's a 1915 Model T touring car is the body style, a 4-door, actually 3-door. I'll tell you a story about that.
Okay.
A 3-door. It's a 4-cylinder, 2.9 liter. For us Americans, 177 cubic inches, because nobody knows what a liter is. 20 horsepower. The early 15 was the last year for the brass on the cars, the radiator and the headlights.
And I love the brass.
Oh, I
and
do
you
too.
mentioned also that
until I have to polish it, I love it.
And that's what I wanted to say. You're putting some good amount of time to make sure that the brass is polished, brass is spectacular. And moments when I was running with the camera, I'm like, wow, that's just the entire car looks just.
It looks so good when it's polished up.
Yes.
And I found I use a newer product than what I was using called Flitz. And the Flitz leaves a protective film, so I don't have to polish it as often. And it takes half the amount of time that I'm used to. So I'm thrilled with this product. But yeah, the brass is, I just add something to the car.
Yeah.
But 15 was early 15s. Henry Ford, there was no, later in car production in the 50s and 60s in particular, something changed on the car every year. Usually it was the grill or the taillights. So you could tell the difference between a 58 and a 59 from 100 yards away. Well, the Model Ts, once you got into, like we talked about before, with the steel cowl from the wood cowl, they didn't change much. And it didn't matter. You know, if Henry Ford had parts left over from 16 when he was starting to make 17 cars, he just kept making them, putting them all together with whatever he had until all the 17 parts came through. So this car is kind of an oddity because it is a 15, but it still has the brass. So it was made early in production because it still has the brass. Or it was put together from pieces somewhere along the line and the history is lost to us. It could be either way. I like to think it was an early 15 because all the brass parts match.
I know we have here exactly a local Edison and Ford estate,
yes.
which is quite an interesting place. I really enjoy going there once in a while, and I'm feeling lucky to have something like that so close. Anything up north, any other areas where if you're interested in a Model T's history and a museum which you would recommend or places to visit?
Greenfield Village.
Greenfield Village.
Yes, it's in Indiana.
Okay.
I think they give rides in Model Ts. They're modern versions of Model Ts, but they have Model T history there.
Yes.
They have and Model T Ford Club of America has a very nice Model T museum. There's the old Ford plant in Detroit. Actually, one of the best examples of a Model T restoration I've ever seen is right here in town, and that's at Rev's Museum.
Rev's Museum.
Yeah, I think it's a 1908.
That's a spectacular place.
And it is. And when anything they restore there, they do it. Just like, well, Clay, who we spoke about before, crazy man that drove his Model T 1,600 miles from Minnesota to Florida.
This gentleman, yes, I had the amazing opportunity to chat with him, exchange few words.
Yeah.
Looking forward to do something more, but
he knew the guy, or knows the guy, that restored that Model T.
Okay.
That's in the Rev's Museum.
Oh, really?
And he's a Model T expert. And when he got the Model T, of course, it wasn't in the best of condition. And he called Rev's and said, okay, it's here. I've got it. It's restorable. What do you want me to do with it? What's our budget?
Yes.
And he says, we want it restored to original. And he says, well, that doesn't answer the rest of my question. What's my budget? And he said, well, there is no budget. We want it done right.
Nice.
And that's why you got what you got there. It's down to the nut and bolt. It's a perfect restoration. So if you want to see what an early Model T looks like, I highly recommend going and seeing that one.
You mentioned Clay. So Clay, exactly, I will have something, I hope, more with Clay. The season is coming here.
Yes, he should be back in town within a month or two.
But the moment when I exchanged words with him, and he mentioned, and you confirmed this, he was driving
got one of his trucks. He's got a Model T truck. He has what they call a couplet, Ford couplet, which they make very few of, and that's what I'm sure he'll keep. It's rare. But Clay
is that this one with the box on the back?
Well, no, that's no. It looks. You know what a doctor's coupe looks like? It's an enclosed car.
Yes.
The couplet, that center pillar on the side, is removable. So it looks like a modern hardtop. It's hard to describe, and he has a picture of it on his Facebook page. You can look at it there. But Clay was looking for another Model T, and he's up in Minnesota, and he finds this Model T, and goes over and looks at it and says, okay, I'm going to buy it. Thinks, okay, well, he brings it home, and it's in pretty good shape. He figures, he looks it over, he knows what he's looking at.
Yeah.
Before he bought it, he wouldn't have bought it. I mean, he knows what he's looking at. He gets it. It's in pretty good shape. And he's supposed to come to Florida in about a month. So he's like, how am I going to get, what am I going to do? I don't know if I drive down, fly down. I want to get this Model T to Florida, but I don't really want to put it on a truck. I don't have a trailer. So he says, I'll just drive it to Florida. So he's owned this Model T less than a month, well, about a month, which anytime you buy a new Model T, you need to shake it down, because there's always something that needs, there's a lot of maintenance that should be looked at, and I'm sure he did all that. But he hops in his car in Minnesota and drives 1,600 miles to it in Florida. Now, he made it without any major problem. When he was in northern Florida, he had a camshaft, there's a gear between the camshaft and the crankshaft, and they are made out of I don't want to call it bakelite, but it was like a resin fiber gear, so it wouldn't make a lot of noise. But they don't last. And of course, when he gets to northern Florida, you can hear it. It's starting to come apart. So he had a friend up there who was a Model T guy that he knew through the club or somehow.
Okay.
He said, "Hey, I'm here, and I need a place to work on my car. Can I bring it there?" And sure. And he had the parts on the shelf, and they overnight put it together, and the next day he's on his way again.
That's amazing.
But 1,600 miles over, I think he said about 14 days.
Not too bad.
That's bold.
Not too bad.
That's bold in a Model T, especially when you've only owned a month and don't know that well. But he like he said, what could go wrong? And I said, well, lots of things. And he says, most of the things that could go wrong, I know how to fix. And he had a good point. I couldn't argue with that.
Simplicity,
and it was an adventure.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing.
He asked his wife if she wanted to go with him, and she said no. So I think she either drove down or flew down later. But and he's if you've been around Naples last season, you've probably seen it. It's a green Model T with like a truck bed on the back of it. It's a coupe with a with a truck bed kind of body on the back, but he drives it all over the place. It's like his daily driver. But if you see him, stop him and ask him about it, because he'd love to talk about it, and he'll give you a ride in it, or do whatever he can to.
Yeah, we exchanged few words, but then I think he was leaving. I'm looking forward to chat a little bit more with him. But it's again, you mentioned the simplicity of the fixing, and that's what I'm learning, and that's what I really love in it. Any type of classic cars, American classic cars, hot rods. That yes, there is some parts which could be more difficult, maybe. Of the car, but mostly is the simplicity of the belt, so you can just pull up on the side of the road. There's always, doesn't matter, you're doing some road trips, which I had opportunity to do past few months too. You have always a little advanced part or any other store with the parts, or sometimes you even know what could break. What I'm meeting those guys too, and they have those parts already in their trunk just in case.
You don't go anywhere. I mean, I have a toolbox that's period correct for the car. Well, there's no tools in it. It's full of spare parts.
That's
just
what
in
I'm
case.
About, but you know already what kind of parts
what's likely to fail.
That's great.
And but there's guys in the club, especially when we went to that Model T Ford Club of America tour. There's guys that drove their cars there from wherever they were from.
Wow.
And drive them all over the country. And they always tell their Model T stories about breaking down on the side of the road and how they fixed it with, a baling wire and duct tape to get them home. And
that's what makes the story.
And it makes the story.
That's what makes the story.
My favorite was, what's his name? Oh, I'll think of it here in a minute. But he's a guy that drives his car over the country, and he got out in Montana in the middle of nowhere, and engine started to knock, and knock bad. So he was throwing a rod bearing. It's a Babbitt bearing, so you're usually pretty good until it starts to come apart. Then it comes apart quickly, and usually when it wears, you have shims in there. You can take some shims out and tighten up the bearing, and you're good to go. Well, he had no shims left in the bearing, so now he's got no shims left, and he's got a knocking bearing. What's he going to do? He's out in the middle of nowhere. So he says, okay. Well, he says, I got to take it apart and see if I can fix it. So he gets it all apart, and he's looking at it, and he's looking at it, and he's looking at it, and he figures out, and it's all oil soaked and everything. He says, takes his belt off, cuts a piece of his belt out, lays it in for the bearing, tightens the bolts down, puts the oil back in it, and drives 200 miles to town.
Wow.
No knock.
Wow.
And he says, it's working fine. I'll just drive it the rest of the way. And he never fixed it till he got home.
Wow.
And then because he knew the fix was major engine.
Okay.
Take the engine out, re-pour the Babbitt bearings.
Yes.
And Babbitt bearings, if people don't even know what Babbitt bearings are anymore, a lot of times. But in a modern car, between the crankshaft and the connecting rods, there's a softer metal bearing, and that's oiled, and that's what wears, not the bearing itself or the connecting rod itself, unless it really goes all to hell. In these older cars, they have what's called a Babbitt bearing, and it's like a low melting point. It's not lead. I forget what the formula is, but it's tin and lead. So when you make the bearing, you put a form around that bearing, and you pour this melted metal in there, and it's usually about I think it's about a 1/4 inch thick, and that's the bearing. And then you shave that bearing down with a knife to fit the connecting rod and onto the crankshaft. So, and you put shims in between the cap and the connecting rod. So as that Babbitt wears, you take a shim out to tighten it up. Okay. Well, when you're out of shims and you're out of bearing, you don't have any option. But there's a technique there's a mold that you have to put in the engine to pour these new bearings. It's quite an operation, and it's getting harder and harder to find somebody who knows how to do that, because it's a dying skill.
It's craft,
Yeah. But it does make the cars, because that's soft enough, even if it starts to knock a little bit, you're not likely to damage the important parts. You're just going to wear that softer bearing Babbitt out. So that's a good thing. And they all make noise. The thing about driving a Model T is you get to recognize what's the good noise and what's the new noise you need to worry about. Because they rattle and they exhaust, and you have vibration, and it's a car that's a wood frame on a steel body on a wood frame, so that's not too tight. So when things are vibrating, things are squeaking and groaning and making all kind of vibrational noises. So and that's how you choose how fast you go down the road too. Where the speed, where you have the least amount of vibration and noise at the speed you want to travel. And for this car, it's about 32 miles an hour or so.
That's interesting. Good noise, bad noise.
And so every once in a while, I couldn't figure out what it was, and it was a really nasty sounding knock. I pulled over the side of the road, and when I'd pull over the side of the road, I couldn't hear it. When I'd start driving down the road again, I could hear it. What the hell is that? And it ended up being for when there's a gas gauge, and the gas gauge is a ruler, and it has markings on it. You stick it down into the tank and you pull it back out. It's where it's marked. You say, okay, I've got 7 gallons left, or 6 gallons, or whatever. That stick had fallen down in between the floorboards, and when I was going down the road, it was hitting on one of the control rods for the braking system.
Wow.
So as that was rattling, it was banging that stick up against the floorboard, and that's what was making the knocking noise.
Wow.
I thought I was throwing a rod, and all it was a stick.
Alrighty, we're gonna slowly start closing here. This fantastic chat with you.
Well, I've enjoyed it. Yeah,
Yes.
I enjoyed our chat.
Oh, it was pleasure. Yeah, thank you for joining me and sharing your story and story Model T, which is amazing.
I'm sure I'll think of a lot of things I should have said 20 minutes from
Yeah,
now.
we definitely meet each other many more times in the future, so we'll always add something, which I'm looking forward to. Looking forward to the entire drive and see how everything exactly works. You know what, I'm talking about all your different car shows and meet of the Model Ts, and you know, thinking about the car shows, United States, they're all over the States, and it's so amazing.
Summertime is touring season.
Yes, and they're, you know, some of them they're similar. You moving through the States, some of them different. Those cars are kind of the same age, but they have some different touches and different way to rest them out them. I'm big right now after I did last year, and that was my dream for years. I overthink a little bit for a few first years, but then finally happened. I did the Route 66, and right now it's 2026, 100 years anniversary is coming. I'm trying to gather some group of guys with classic cars, but talking something totally on a separate episode. Model T, guys, you should do something too.
That's a long trip.
I know, but I'm just thinking
you should talk
about
to Clay
this.
about that.
I'm just
and there's
thinking,
a couple.
yes.
If I could remember the guy's name, it's in the Model T magazine. He's in there every month. I'll have to show you that.
Yes.
The guys that are big into touring. And matter of fact, I don't know if he's got another car now. He unfortunately was in an accident and wrecked his car. Totally destroyed it. I mean, just made a modern car against the Model T is not a contest.
No.
I'm sure he's got another one. He probably had another one already. But yeah, that's I enjoy the tours. There's the tours, unfortunately, as far as the Model T is concerned, is the tours, because the hobby is changing, the tours are changing. The tours are being geared more and more towards modern cars. There's still a couple that cater to the older cars, and that's the Glidden Tour, which is 42 and older cars. And then there's one called the HBC Tour, which is high ABC Tour, all brass cars, ABC, all brass cars. And I think that's 1914 and earlier. And then there's also another one that's 1 and 2 cylinder cars. That one is cool.
Wow.
Because all the cars are real early, like in the 10s and 12s and even earlier. The thing I like about the real early tour, the one that's 14 and earlier, is it's at really the beginning of the automobile industry, when nothing was standardized. So you go from car to car to car to car, and you say, oh, this one's got individually cast cylinders. Oh, this one they're all cast together but bolted to the crankcase. Oh, this one, they're opposed. This one cylinders, this one they're vertical cylinders. This one they're radial. This one's air cooled. This one's water cooled. And you look at the cars down that whole history of when things were just brand new, and some of them have chain drive, some of them have shaft drive, some of them are pretty much like the Model T with the planetary transmission. And you go down the whole line and you look at some of it and you say, oh yeah, well, that's pretty much still how we're doing it. It's crude, but it's pretty much still how we're doing it today.
Yeah.
And you look at some of them and you think, my God, what the hell were they thinking? But nobody knew any different. So they were trying out all new stuff, and they figured out what worked and what didn't. So by the time you got into the 20s and 30s, a lot of that weird stuff had disappeared because it either was inefficient, or it broke, or it was too costly to manufacture, or some reason. And really into the 30s is when things really started to standardized. You know, a 4 or 6 cylinder engine with a distributor, and you know, a 3 or 4 speed transmission with a clutch. Yeah.
Garland, thank you for your time.
Of course, thank you.
Looking forward to our ride, and
okay. Well,
yeah, thank you again for sharing your story.
We'll show you how to start it up.
Fantastic.
And drive around a little bit.
Nice.
Show you how it works, and hopefully we won't hit anything. Okay, first thing you need to do is very important so you don't get kicked by the car. Make sure the spark advance is fully retarded all the way up. Okay? You give it about an inch or an inch and a half of throttle to start. This is your throttle. You turn the key to battery. When you turn the key to battery, if it's in the right position, you'll hear the coils buzzing. Buzz, 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 and that's the coils inside this box firing off the cylinders. Once we get it running, we'll switch it to the other side, and then it runs off the magneto on the engine. Okay. When you're ready to crank the car, you always crank with an open hand, always. Never ever with your thumb over top of the crank, because if it kicks, and what I mean by kicking is if it fires when the piston's on its way up while you're pulling this handle, it'll kick this handle and it can break your thumb, and if it spins all the way around, it can break your arm. Even in today's orthopedics, there's still something called a chauffeur's fracture, and it's a fracture right here, and that's how it got its name. So once we're ready to start, we'll engage the crank. There's a pawl on the end of this crank that engages the crank on the end of the crankshaft, or a pulley on the edge of the crankshaft. We'll give it one choke. That's what this little pull is here. Now you can hear the coils buzzing. Advance the spark, you can hear it smooth out. And we'll let it warm up a little bit. Put the crank back in there just so it's not swinging around. That's usually how it starts. It doesn't take much to start it usually.
Nice.
If it gets warm or it gets flooded, maybe 8 or 9 pulls. Or if I'm trying to show how easy it is to start, that's when it won't start. It beats me. That's my dad there. I take him with me. Three pedals, high, low, brake, and reverse. This lever over here holds the car. It's got a parking brake on the rear wheel, and it holds this pedal in neutral. It needs to be adjusted correctly, because if it's not, and you go to start it, the car will creep on you, and it'll run you over. So it needs to be adjusted just right. I'll put my foot on the brake. I'll release this handle all the way down. Now that cedes control of this pedal to my foot. So I need to hold that in neutral while I'm drifting down the driveway, and then to go in reverse, I push in on the center pedal. When I'm ready to go forward, I push in on the left pedal as I gradually increase my engine speed. And I lock it down. When I get up to current speed, we'll give it some gas and push in on the left pedal. Speed up, let the throttle off, let the pedal out. Now we're in high gear. Now we can speed up again. If you're wondering what that is on the radiator there, that's our temperature gauge.
Ah.
It has a thermometer in it, and as the engine heats up, that thermometer will raise. When it gets up into that circle, we're getting too hot. As long as we're moving along, shouldn't be a problem. But when you sit and idle in traffic, or you get caught like I did going in the Mercado there, just sitting, with no air moving through the radiator. Place to show somebody how to drive.
Yeah.
From Model T and don't know how to drive it.
Oh, really?
He says, I can drive it, but not well. I need practice.
That was nice ride. That was unique ride. That was amazing. All those people honking on you and saying hi, and that's amazing too. Listen, as we leave in car, I want to ask once again. You mentioned 3 doors, and you were smiling back then. Well, I want to know this story of the 3-door.
Well, all the Model Ts only have 3 doors. They have a passenger door in the front and a passenger and a driver's side door in the rear. The driver's side, it's outlined for a door, but there's not actually a door there. And I guess it was because of this handle. I don't know the exact reason, but I guess that's it.
Ah, okay.
But the story is, when I inherited this car and we got it through the estate and all that, I went to register it in my name. And I went over here to the DMV over here on Golden Gate Parkway, and it's
got in line, did all the, I got up to the counter, and there was a young girl there, maybe 25, maybe 30. And I said, I have a car. It was my father's. He passed away. I need to register it in my name. Okay, no problem. And she says, well, what kind of car is it? And I said, it's a 1915 Model T Ford. And she says, 1950? and I says, no, 15, 1-5. And she says, well, why do you want to register it? I said, well, I'm going to drive it.
Yeah.
It runs? I'm like, sure, it runs. Okay, all right. She didn't really believe it, I don't think, but she says 1915, 1-5. And I said, yes, 1915 Model T Ford, and the body style is touring. And she says, okay. And she says, I don't show that coming up in my computer. And she says, can you tell me more about it? I says, yeah, it's an open car, and I didn't have any pictures of it. I don't know why on my phone, but. And I said, it's got 3 doors. And she says, oh, like a hatchback. And I said, no, not like a hatchback. It's not a hatchback. It's got 3 doors. It doesn't have a door on the passenger side or the driver's side. And she says, well, how do you get into it then? I said, you have to get it on the passenger side. And we went round and round and round. She just couldn't get it through her head that it didn't have 3 doors. She says, now, does it have 4 doors? And it just doesn't work? And I said, no, it does not. She just couldn't get it through her head that it did not have 4 doors. And she says, well, okay. She says, I'm not showing that it doesn't have a VIN number, just has an engine number. She says, I'm not showing that engine number. When was the last time that title was transferred? And I said, 1958. Oh, we don't have computers back then. And we just kept going around, but she was trying to do everything through the computer, and it just couldn't be done through the computer.
Yeah.
And finally, she went and got the other girl that's been there forever. What's her name? Wanda. Mm-hmm. Wanda says, yeah, I know about those. She said, I'll take care of it. And she took care of it and take it over. But she couldn't believe it's 20 horsepower. And it was, I was telling her about the car, and she just I couldn't believe, I don't know why you're going to drive that on the road. I said, well, because I can.
That's funny.
But the 3-door stumped her.
Yeah, nice. Thanks once again for the ride,
of course,
Goran. Fantastic ride, fantastic time. Thank you for sharing this story.
I love sharing this car.